Mr. Kassan.
Mr. Joe Benaroche.
I'm so proud to have you here. And I just want to say before we start, thank you for everything you've done for me and for my family. And I really, really appreciate it. You've always been a great support. So cheers to you.
Well, let me toast with the proper thank you.
So what do you got?
We have a lot of history.
We do have a lot of history. But I have always appreciated your support, your guidance, your mentorship.
Here we are.
No, but so tell me, we started this breakfast on the balcony to really support, the opening of the markets, the excitement that happens here every day. And you sitting in that seat, you've always brought so much to the industry, so much intelligence, so much, you've always brought people together, just like the stock exchange. The stock exchange really prides itself on being a convening organization. But I want to dial back a bit. I want to rewind to where you got to the place where you said, I see a little bit of a gap in the market. I see some sort of mind shift that got you to the place where you started dreaming up 3C Ventures.
I had a crossroads a little less than 2 years ago, maybe 18 months ago, and I had a decision I had to make. And that decision was, do I continue to operate in the industry that I really treasure? And that is the industry that kind of convenes at the intersection of marketing and media and advertising and entertainment, sports and technology. And as it sounds, it's a pretty congested intersection. But I think the opportunity that I've seen previously, and even more so right now, was the opportunity to bring some sense to that chaos. I've always had a view that chaos creates opportunity. And I would submit at that intersection, it's about as chaotic as it's ever been. There's a lot of competing forces. And if you look at the fundamental shifts in our industry, I'd say over the kind of arc of my career, there's been 3 or 4 significant inventions, too broad of a word, but moments that I think have changed society. And in my career arc, I think it began with mobile telephony, the introduction of the mobile telephony. First time I used a cell phone in 1983 in Washington, D.C. Because Chicago and Washington were the first markets that the government actually tested cellular technology. I got into a car and it had a mobile phone in it, and I said, our world has just changed.
Yeah.
And it was a moment. I think the advent of the internet would be the second moment. Mm-hmm. And the moment we're in right now with the advent of AI is the third.
Yeah.
And I looked at it and I said, wait, I've been fortunate enough to be in business during the first 2. Would I really want to be on the golf course during the third one?
No
I
way.
suck at golf, so
no, not
why
you.
bother?
No, not you.
I mean, I can always buy nice golf togs, but at the end of the day, I'd rather be in the mix. And I was fortunate, Joe, to still have a degree of relevance at a time where this shift is happening. And I've never seen anything quite like it.
So we always ask this question on what's toast, what are we toasting? And we started the conversation out with the convening nature, of this organization, this institution, but you've always had that power of bringing people together, and you talked about the congestion, how congested the marketplace is. So do you think those kind of industry mosh pits, those big overdone gatherings are kind of the thing of the past? Those are toast, or what are you really toasting as you're seeing people come together?
Well, I think I've always understood for the, well, I shouldn't say always, but for most of my career, I've understood the importance of convening, but not only convening in the physical sense, although that's what we're talking about here, but I think convening around thought as well. However, I've always been a believer in efficiency. where you can find efficiency, things get done. I've had this old view that if you find me a fragmented circumstance that can be made more efficient through consolidation, somebody makes money. And I look at it and I say, well, there's fragmentation in interaction with people. And since physicality and IRL has become so important for everything we do, I looked at it and said, wait, there's an efficiency. So I looked at things like the Cannes Lions, and I looked at things like the Consumer Electronics Show, and I looked at things like large conferences, and I said, wait, while that gets too big sometimes, and I'll get to the mosh pit in a moment, there's an efficiency. Everybody's together, so why not use that?
Yeah.
And that's how I've always looked at it. Now, I've made a couple of splashes over the years with some of the events that we do, and created a bit of a velvet rope, and that was part of the plan.
Yeah.
If I'm honest about that, and of course I would be, but it wasn't around a party. It was around bringing people together. It was check your weapons at the door. And I prided myself on always having that. Bring all the competitors into one room. And other than trade associations, that generally doesn't happen. And I fortunately was able to make that happen and tell everybody, we're all in this together. And again, going back to the efficiency, why wouldn't you use those moments?
Correct.
Now, you mentioned mosh pits, Joe. I didn't invent them, but in our industry, the early days when we did that first event in the south of France, when Elton John showed up, and that's a wonderful story about how that came together, and I give full credit to my friend and partner, Bob Pittman, for having a brilliant idea. It's an anecdote that's worth sharing if you're interested.
Of course. That's why you're here.
So when Bob and I started talking, and Bob came out of retirement to go to what was then Clear Channel, it hadn't been renamed iHeart, Bob called me and said his head of revenue at the time, Tim Costelli, who we both know, said, gee, I think we should go to Cannes. And Bob called me and said, Michael, do you think we should come to Cannes? I said, well, if my remit as your partner and friend is to help get people to understand that radio, which is what he was involved in at that moment, wasn't dead, because that was the rumor on the street. Sure. And I kind of was having this conversation with myself as he asked the question. I'm answering it. I'm saying, well, yeah, Bob, that probably would make sense. He said, well, I understand you have this party. And I said, he says, I kind of understand people say you kind of own Cannes Lions. I said, well, I don't own it. It's owned by the organization, the Cannes Lions organization, a company called Essential, actually. Yeah. Not back then, it wasn't called Essential, but it was ultimately. And I said, but I may rent it for a couple of days a year. I mean, I planted a flag there. and Bob said, I understand you have this velvet rope party. I said, well, we have a dinner at a pretty nice spot, and it's worked out to be an important event. He said, could we partner with you? And I said, Bob, I've looked at this as my company's way to trademark it. So I wasn't interested in the early days in making it look like a NASCAR jacket. Nothing wrong with NASCAR, but I didn't want too many logos on it. So, because it was my idea to build a brand through an event strategy.
And it never did, right. I mean, it always looked really prestigious.
And that was the plan.
Absolutely.
And it was also efficiency, getting back to why I did it.
Totally.
But the great part of this story is, so Bob said, well, we thought we could supply entertainment. And I said, Bob, I tried that in Las Vegas at the Consumer Electronics Show, and Sony Music served up a wonderful artist, 5-time Grammy Award-winning artist, and you know what happened? Not one person in the room listened to the artist. It was horribly embarrassing, because people were there at our events for the networking and the schmoozing, not for a concert, ergo a mosh pit. And Bob said, well, I was thinking A-list talent. And I said, okay, humor me. What do you got? And he said, Elton John. And I said, partner. My mother didn't have stupid children, I'd like to say.
Man.
Elton John isn't talent. Elton John is Elton John.
He's a
That's
legend,
another level. You're going to bring Elton John to our dinner.
Yeah, you will now stop can.
Yeah, this is a game changer.
Totally.
And I will tell you, not that I've been invited to, but if I were asked to write a business school case study on how an event strategy helped achieve a goal, the goal was to convince the market that radio wasn't dead. Well, guess what? Right around that time, Clear Channel became iHeart. The iHeart brand was built through an event strategy, and it worked.
Yeah.
And the market believed radio wasn't dead. So I always like to say, there are parties for party's sake. There are events that want to make a point. Hopefully, if you bring those together, you end up with a convened strategy that makes sense. So I hope that I drew that circle to a place. And the iHeart story is a really true story as it became institutionalized.
Yep.
And I guess the marketplace view was, well, gee, if Clear Channel / iHeart is having these parties at these prestigious places and bringing this talent and Elton John and Mariah Carey and John Bon Jovi and, over the years we did that, well, they must not be dead.
No, they're not. I know. Running into Bob Pittman at one of those events was pretty remarkable.
So I go to the point of why.
Yeah.
For me, it was trade marketing.
Yeah.
For others, it was I want to make a point.
Yeah.
But when you bring those things together, as I said, that flywheel
absolutely
really works.
The other part, and I want to give you some time to eat your breakfast, but the other part of your C is co-investing. How do you, in particular, size up the market? And what I mean by that is you have seen so many different shifts. I mean, you talked about it from, certain waves of internet mobility, and you've seen, waves of search, and I mean, you've seen them all, and you've always had that incredible eye on convergence. Right now, how are you thinking about sizing up the market, and what are you looking at? What areas are you kind of peeking around? Give us the Michael Kassan view.
Joe, as I said, these fundamental shifts that have happened over this, arc. I've been doing this for about 50 years. I started when I was 3. The child labor laws did not apply. But in all seriousness, the adoption rate. So I remember in the early days of mobile cellular, when they were talking about adoption rates of 5%.
Yeah.
I would submit to you, if we asked the people around this facility here in a few minutes, how many people have a cell phone? It'll be more than 100% because I've got 2. So
right
there you go.
Correct.
So the adoption rate always happens differently, not always faster, but differently. The AI adoption rate, I've never seen anything like this. And there's no choice.
Correct.
You must.
Yeah.
Jensen Huang said something very interesting at a tech summit that I was fortunate enough to hear. He looked out at an audience of about 1,000 people and he said, you folks, your job is safe from AI, but it's not safe from somebody who understands AI. That person's job is likely subject to some risk because AI will ultimately replace that person's job.
Yeah.
But we're kicking the can a bit.
Totally.
That was interesting because what it says is education matters, number one. You have to learn how to use the tools. You must. If not, good night. Number one. Number two, and I'll digress for a moment. A good friend of mine who's chief marketing officer, Andrea Brimmer at Alley Bank, did something at a conference not that long ago. She got up on the stage and she brought her CFO, and she looked out at the audience and said, all of you who are pitching me as a marketer for this or that, what you really need to understand is you're pitching me and my partner over
Correct.
Here, my chief financial officer. So the technology shift and push on AI is not only coming from an efficiency standpoint of technological advances, it's coming from the CFO. The CFO says, I know I can see 20, 25, 30, whatever percent savings on the bottom line. I want to see this happen faster.
Yep.
And so, the partnership, what's so interesting, when I talked to Joe earlier about the intersection of marketing, media, advertising, entertainment, sports, and technology, what that did was brought the marketer closer to the IT department, closer to the chief tech
Yeah.
What the marketplace is doing is making that partnership now really a trifecta. You've got the CMO, the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer, and the CFO.
Absolutely.
All convening.
I know.
I'm bringing convening back into
No, that's
this.
good. We're actually bringing a CMO, CFO experience here in November because of that exact dynamic.
And it's not just procurement.
No.
It's ROI.
Correct.
Because marketing investments have to be subject to the same scrutiny that any investment has. Did I
Correct.
get the ROI? This is the holy grail. For how long have we heard 50% of my advertising dollars
Correct.
are wasted? Which 50%? We're not just talking about advertising. We're talking about all sorts of marketing.
Yeah.
I will tell you, as we're talking about job interviews, the interview question that I will never not ask. This is my new one. I was fortunate to be in the room when Serena Williams was being interviewed at a conference for Zeta Live, and David Steinberg, the CEO, asked her a great question about, the aspirations to become a GOAT. I mean, Serena Williams, at the end of the day,
She was here. She rang the bell.
is a GOAT.
She's the
And
GOAT.
she's wonderful, and she's generous of spirit and everything else, and obviously the talent speaks for itself.
Of course.
But they talked about mediocrity, and he said, the thing I'm going to ask in a job interview is, are you okay with mediocrity? And I thought, yeah, I would hope you'd ask that question.
Totally.
But what are the signals that we get
Yep.
in life? Well, what are the signals you get in an interview?
Totally.
The signal I get, if somebody tells me they got a low Uber score, I'm going to bet there's probably something in terms of your ability to interact with people that might be worth looking at.
Right. Carter Ream was sitting there, and he said when a person walks in to him and he starts evaluating them and their company, it's about their inspiration. And for you, I hear you're like, no, can you be faced with adversity? Are you comfortable with mediocrity? How are you just interacting with human beings right now? Is there a skill set that you've either had to scrap, unlearn a bit, try to, change your kind of leadership behaviors? There's something that Michael Kassan has said, no, I have to either evolve in a certain different way. I'm creating this new company in this present time. I'm just curious about your leadership style.
I think what I'd say to that, Joe, is life is an iteration. We're always editing. Mm-hmm. I'm going to bring AI into this conversation. When I've been asked what's the difference between my previous company and 3C Ventures,
Okay.
I've said, well, I liken this to what I've started to experience with ChatGPT. I fancy myself a reasonably good writer. I was an English major. I think I'm pretty good at writing. But what I'm really good at is editing. Where I found great value for me with artificial intelligence is I can get a first draft with the right prompt. If I put a good enough prompt in, I get a really good first draft out, and then I get my editing skills. And if the prompt is really creating something with my voice,
Yeah.
and as the more you're training and learning, it does,
Yeah.
I get a first draft and then I get to edit it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I look at my previous company as the first draft. I look at 3C Ventures as the edited version of it. I wrote a book. It was a pretty good book.
It was.
I didn't have to rewrite the book.
No.
I could just edit it.
Right.
I could edit it for what's happening now. And what's happening now is I needed a different mix. I had a view with the previous company that the strength came from practical experience. Mm-hmm. And I still believe that. But I believe there's a little bit more value in adding in a big sprinkling of the more esoteric consultant experience.
Yeah.
What I used to say is, if I'm giving you advice, I'm giving you advice based on my own experience. I've been in your shoes.
Right.
So if I'm telling you what I think you need to do, I've already done it, or variation of it, because I'm an operator by trade, and by experience. So I want to just do it. I don't want to
Right.
worry about telling you how to do it. I just go do it.
Yeah.
I've had to blend that a little because my tendency is to let me just do it,
Right.
as opposed to, well, it's yours to do, but let me help you do it. And that comes with the consulting experience. So
Yeah.
there's something to be said for the cohorts we call the acronym MBB, McKinsey, Bain, BCG. They're wonderful organizations. Generally speaking, they don't have experience actually doing the work. They have experience consulting on the work. I found a better mix of that, I
Sure.
believe. Bring the practical together with the consultative and end up with a better better product.
Yeah, I see the evolution on the consulting part. I absolutely see your evolution on the convening part. You can see it even in the way you're talking about it. I've seen some of the things. So I see those three things. I want to go back to the co-investing because, I mean, I know consulting, convening, co-investing, 3C. Are there some industries, you know, a lot of what we're, you know, seeing here, obviously, crypto, biotech, you know, just wellness in general, mobility on fintech. Are there certain industries that you're paying a little bit more attention to right now?
I think we have to pay more attention to health. And so I say biotech.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm that erudite to say biotech, but health.
Yeah.
And I think that won't go out of style, and it's much more important every day. So I think you can't underestimate that. Look, if we focus this on media and marketing and advertising, the areas in what I call commerce media, the expression retail media has blown up over the last few years. It began with, really, at least from my perspective, when Amazon finally broke out the numbers that they were selling in advertising several years ago. And the first time they gave a number of a broken out advertising number, I want to say it was 5 years ago, but I could be wrong, it might have been a little longer. I think it was $31 billion. And all of a sudden the world woke up and said, well, wait, we've been talking about a duopoly. Actually, it's not a duopoly. There's three folks at that trough that are drinking a lot of the water. And that was obviously Meta, Alphabet, and Amazon.
Yeah.
The retail media craze really grew up as a result of that because everybody else, Walmart, Target, Albertsons, Kroger's, you go down the line, and I'm going to get to why we've kind of changed the name in our view from retail media to commerce media. That's an area that has just exploded. And the reason we call it commerce media at 3C is it's not just retailers anymore. Uber has a retail media network, so it's a commerce media network. Lyft has one. Most of the financial services institutions are now creating them. And many people are trying to figure out, well, wait, do I need my own network or should I use my data or my inventory to supplement what others are doing?
That's right.
So I'll go back to what I said earlier, Joe. In that space, it's not just where the money is going, because a lot of money is going there, but it's also a question of how marketers are looking at it from the standpoint of too much choice. So I go back to when I used those three words a minute ago: fragmentation, consolidation, and efficiency. If you find me a fragmented market that, as I said, can be made more efficient through consolidation, people make money.
That's true.
That's going to happen in commerce media. There's going to be a consolidation. Not everybody needs one.
No.
So that's number one.
Yep.
So there's an explosion,
Okay.
and then there won't be an implosion, but there'll be a contraction.
A contraction, right.
And there'll be consolidation. So I think that's an area where we're seeing enormous attention. The other area is, and it's a term that's used, I think, inartfully by most, the creator economy. And if you talk about influencer and creator, people tend to confuse those two things.
Completely.
And they're different entirely. But the creator economy is not only here to stay, it's exploding. And if you think of the internet, one of the great promises of the internet in the early days was the democratization of content. When I grew up, there were 3 networks. When Fox came in, there were 4.
Right.
Then there was cable, cable and Fox were around the same time in terms of the growth. Great book to read, by the way, Born to be Wired, the John Malone autobiography.
On the list.
Highly recommended. It tells you the history of cable from the lens of the man who basically wrote the history of
On
cable.
the list.
So highly recommend it. But when you think about that proliferation and you think about the myriad of choices you had, you have to kind of refine it.
Yeah.
And we're at that moment again. In the creator economy, when I say the democratization, back in the day, there were 3 networks, as I said.
Mm-hmm.
That meant there were 3 people who had that green light switch, who could determine if content would see the light of day or not. Well, the internet promised to change that, because Joe Benaroche, Michael Kassan, I can go upload whatever I want. I create my own content. I distribute it myself. I don't need to go through that green light.
Correct.
That's great on the one hand. The democratization, even more. But this creator economy,
I know it's big.
it's big, and it's going to get bigger.
And we've, even on our end, because people don't naturally think of the New York Stock Exchange as a publisher of content, or, us, putting out information into the marketplace. So we've been having conversations with big media companies that you naturally, I would say, consult, work with, talk to, have been
Thankfully,
have been quite surprised, but it's been great. What can you tell me right now about some different leadership trends that you're seeing in the market, about people who are leading those companies? And so we talked a lot about your leadership, the way in which you are particularly leading and have shaped 3C, which I really appreciate. But you're now, you have your ear to some of the biggest leaders across the globe. And I'm curious what leadership trends you're seeing shift in them as they're guiding their companies forward.
well, a maniacal focus on talent, obviously, and the appropriate focus on culture. There are a couple of old bumper stickers that still resonate. Culture eats strategy all day long. So I think focusing on culture matters. It's not a kind of airy-fairy thing to focus on. It's critically important to your business.
Yeah.
So if the culture isn't right, I don't care what you got. And of course, strategy. But strategy is only as good as the people you have to execute it. So years ago, I interviewed at a fireside chat Justin Smith. Justin now is one of the founders of Semaphore, but previously, when we worked together, he was a chief operating officer of, and maybe even CEO of Bloomberg Media at one point. He was CEO of Bloomberg Media at one point.
Yeah.
And I was interviewing him, and he said, my job is CEO, but my actual job is CTO. I said, gee, I didn't know you were a tech guy. He said, no, chief talent officer. He said, the most important thing I have to do is make sure I have the right talent in the right position.
That's
so
right.
I look at myself as chief talent officer, because at the end of the day, you could give me the best strategy in the world. If I was fortunate enough without the right talent to land on a good strategy, great. But if I don't have the right talent, I could have the best strategy in the world. It's never going to happen.
Correct.
So at the end of the day, good leadership focuses on the people first.
Yeah.
That's got to be the first thing you focus on. Obviously, I'm asked all the time in the co-invest side, what are the indicia of people you want to invest in or things you look for? I look for passion. I look for experience. It's got to be something I understand.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
I have a philosophy similar to what I learned working with the Walt Disney Company over the years. The Walt Disney Company back in the early aughts had something called Steamboat Ventures, and it was their in-house venture group.
Mm-hmm.
They would only invest in things, as I recall, that they knew the Walt Disney Company in some way, shape, or form would use. So if you came out with, a wire to hang a picture, I guess you could argue they could use it because they hang a lot of pictures in buildings and hotels, but you understand my point.
I do, yeah.
It has to be that. I look at investment, my thesis has to include something that A, I understand, B, that I think I can make a difference. Because if it's something that I can't make a difference, then I probably shouldn't be investing in it.
Right.
Because I probably don't understand it. Or, it's not a place where I'm going to invest just, that doesn't mean somebody comes and tells me, gee, I think there's oil over there. You want to go, drill an oil well. Occasionally I'll drill an oil well. You know,
because you brought up a couple of great things, and to connect some. Yesterday, I was fortunate to hear a conversation between Lynn Martin, our president, and Jim, one of the co-founders of Axios, and he was talking a lot about exactly what you said with respect to education and AI. And he said, companies and leaders are really doing a disservice to their employees if they're not putting out AI education in front of them, not because it needs to necessarily advance just the company, but just advance them professionally and just give them skills. Because to your exact point, as you're building all these strategies, all these different kind of components and capabilities and resources are coming into play. So he was talking a lot about the education.
Matters, Joe.
Yeah.
I love to tell this story. I'm a storyteller, and I think this one says it all. I was having breakfast with a mutual friend of ours, Rita Farrow. This was about 5 years ago.
She's
We're
great.
having breakfast, and the soup du jour then was blockchain. Everybody was focused on blockchain. What is this going to mean? And we were sitting at breakfast. It was around December, and I always kid with Rita and say this was a very expensive breakfast. We were at the Regency Hotel, the location of the original Power Breakfast.
Yeah.
Well, this Power Breakfast was expensive. What Rita told me was she had enrolled in an online course on blockchain, and it was through the University of Pennsylvania, and it was an online course, and it was $4,000 per person.
Wow.
And I said, for holiday gifts for my senior executives this year, I'm going to buy them that.
I love that.
And so I went to Wharton and I worked out. I didn't get a deal. I paid retail. Don't tell anyone that, please.
That is brilliant.
And I said to my top 20 people back then, you can do the math. That's why it was an expensive breakfast. I said, I can give you the greatest gift. We need to learn this now. I didn't understand enough about blockchain. We all need to understand it. And so I didn't force everybody. I thought it was a wonderful opportunity, and everybody loved it. And that was about educating people about what's happening. Because again, in our business, if I'm going to advise you, I better know what the hell I'm talking about.
Right.
So to me, that's how you treat the most important assets you have, which is the talent.
Correct. Well, it's so apropos considering we're right here moments away from the opening bell with Phoenix Education Partners. So well timed, well played, but we're really excited. But I have one final question before we ring the opening bell today. If you were to toast one person, one moment, one idea just from the past year. Yeah. Who is Michael Kassan raising their glass to?
I would think in the past year, I'm going to give credit back to somebody I mentioned earlier, Jensen Huang. When I heard him speak, he touched on three things. The one I mentioned earlier about educating your people, and the second was, as Meghan Trainor taught us with her song, It's All About the Bass, what Jensen Huang taught me, at least not personally, but what I took away
Right.
was it's all about the prompt.
Yeah.
And the importance of the prompt, garbage in, garbage out. The better the prompt, the better
Totally.
the better the response. That was number two. The third lesson that he said, and you probably heard this, I just hadn't heard it articulated this way. He described the difference between knowledge and intelligence. He said, knowledge is the art of knowing things. Intelligence is the art of solving problems.
That's right.
And I love that distinction because lots of people can know a lot of stuff,
That's right.
but what do they do with it?
Yeah.
I always say, in my life, I've only met one person that I think makes it all the way to a Renaissance man, okay?
Yeah.
And that's a mutual friend of ours, Erwin Gottlieb. And I always say Erwin is the person I met in my career. Well, let me say it differently. In my career, in my life, I've met lots of people who know a lot about a little. And I met lots of people who know a little about a lot.
Yeah.
But you rarely meet someone who knows a lot about a lot.
About a lot.
And that's Erwin. So I always say, whether it's, being in Napa Valley and him knowing more than any sommelier in any place, or being at the Consumer Electronics Show and walking around with him and having the tech people trying to explain it to him, and then he explains to them what they're talking about. I just use those as examples, but you know, the art of knowledge is important, but the art of solving problems
is
wins the day for me.
Michael Kassan, your brain belongs in the Hall of Fame, my friend.
Well, thank you, Joe. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.